you all afterwards, your experience, and this is neat.
All right, I think we can get started. So Drew, I'm Kim Forbeck, the manager of land stewardship at the Urban Ecology Center. So I oversee the land management at all three branches. And Drew Vandegrift is our land steward, one of our land stewards at our Riverside Park location. He came to us from Michigan and has degrees in fisheries and wildlife, as well as a graduate degree in horticulture from Michigan State University. He's very has a lot of really great knowledge, and I'm glad that he put this class together to share with us all. So while he's giving the presentation, we'll ask everyone to mute. Sometimes if your video is challenged, turning off your video will also help with your bandwidth. And there will be a couple points within the presentation that Drew will have some time for questions. So you could put questions when we come to that time, you can unmute and ask some questions, but you can also put questions in the chat, and I'll be sure to sort of watch the chat as well.
Thanks, Kim.
Yeah.
I have a video I recorded back in the fall, so you'll notice I have a little less facial hair, but I'll share my screen and we'll start with that. Kim, can you see my screen?
Yes, sorry, I had to unmute.
No worries. Okay.
Hello and welcome. My name is Drew Vandegrift. I am a land steward here at the Urban Ecology Center, where we connect people in cities to nature and to each other. Today, we will connect to nature through the art of tea. We will learn how to brew and collect herbal tea with a mix of instructional slides and videos. Enjoy.
Alrighty. I'm going to get started. All right, so I don't think I need to say this because it sounds like you all already know this, but tea, technically, what we're talking about today is tisane. Tea specifically comes from the plant Camellia sinensis. Most of your black teas and green teas come from Camellia sinensis. So I'll be calling it tea, but just know that it's technically a tisane, Tisane. As for timing with this, the presentation itself and questions probably won't take more than an hour, just in case any of you have something to get to after this. All right. Quick overview of what we'll learn. First, we'll learn about 12 species native to Wisconsin and most of the Midwest that you can make into an herbal tea. Next, we'll look at responsible foraging practices. I'll give you resources you need to grow your own teas. We'll look at some supplies for harvesting. I'll show you how to easily identify the plants that you do find. We'll learn about saving herbs. And finally, I'll give you some brewing ratios for making tea and infusions. All right, I'm going to begin by discussing native plants. First, a definition. Native plants have evolved and are adapted to a specific location and have remained genetically unaltered by humans. In other words, native plants have been in the location long enough that plants and animals in the area have evolved with them. Just realized I should shrink this. Wildlife have developed relationships with plants just like we develop relationships with food crops. Many wildlife species are specialists and have co-evolved with specific plants. A great example is the monarch and the milkweed. Monarch specifically only feeds on milkweed. This coevolution has occurred over thousands of years. And quick fun fact from Doug Tallamy, did you know that 90% of insect herbivores are specialists to particular plants? I thought that was pretty neat. There are many organisms that form relationships with plants. Fungi in the soil break down nutrients that the plant can take up. Insects bore into the stem to shelter for winter. Wildlife can eat the plant, the pollen in the flower or the fruits. And these are just a few of the relationships that plants have with other life. And the point I would like to drive home here is the more native plants we have, the more life we have. We'll be focusing on plants native to Wisconsin and most of the Midwest. Before we begin, a quick disclaimer. As with any herb, it's important to start drinking these wild teas in small amounts and see how you respond. If you have medical conditions, if you're pregnant, nursing, or on medication, be sure to consult your physician. All right, I am going to go into the main content. I'm going to show you some videos so you can get an idea of what the species looks like. And I'll go over some flavor profiles and a couple other fun facts. And after this video, I'll take some time to answer questions, or we could review some comments. So please put those in the chat and Kim will help me make sure I get to those.
So Drew, one comment that people have is that your volume is a little bit low.
Okay.
I think maybe if you're just a little bit closer to the speaker, that might help. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you. I'll try to talk louder too. Okay, our first species is giant blue hyssop. The flavor profile for this species, if you make tea out of the leaves, are licorice and anise. It grows in prairies and open woodlands. And again, for this plant, you'll harvest the leaves. Just a word of caution, don't use this plant when you're pregnant. Next, St. John's wort. We have several St. John's wort native to the Midwest. Avoid common St. John's wort. The scientific name is Hypericum perforatum. That one is non-native. This one doesn't taste too great. It's bitter, astringent, but there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that it helps with mild depression. For St. John's wort, you can harvest the leaf or the flower, and it grows in prairies and fields. And another word of caution, be cautious about drinking this tea before heading out into the sun because it can cause adverse skin and eye reactions. Number 3 is New Jersey tea, also known as red root. This is a bush or a small shrub, and its flavor profile is described as roughness on the tongue. So I think you'll just have to try this one. To make tea, you'll harvest the leaves. And this plant is usually found in upland woods and fields. Next is wild bergamot. You'll harvest the leaves, which actually change in flavor over the year. The early leaves are minty, then it transitions to an oregano flavor, and the old leaves are hot. This grows in prairies and open woodlands. This is one of my favorites, wintergreen. This plant tastes like wintergreen gum. The red berries are packed with minty flavor. For tea, you'll harvest the leaves, and you'll find this plant in sandy areas and conifer forests. Next is New England aster. This one has a florally flavor. It tastes perfumey, is how I would describe it. This grows in fields and moist open woods. And beware that munching on the flowers or making a tea from the flowers can put you to sleep. So maybe a good before bedtime tea. Next is strawberry. You'll harvest the leaves of strawberry. Just be cautious on harvesting any wilted strawberry leaves as they can contain cyanide. So just make sure you're harvesting fresh, healthy looking leaves. This tea has a sweet flavor, and you can make it even sweeter with the strawberries. And this plant can grow in some pretty rough conditions, as you can see on the video, roadsides, open woodlands, fields. The first tree in our list is white cedar. And if you like the smell of pine, you'll probably like the tea that this plant can make. It tastes like pine. To make a tea, harvest the needles, which are high in vitamin C. White cedar grows in moist woodlands. And we'll get a cool look at the scaly needles here. Another tree, birch. We have 7 native birch species in Wisconsin, including yellow birch, heartleaf, black, canoe, bog, purpose, sandbergs, and sandbergs birch. The flavor profile is wintergreen, and you can scratch and sniff the twigs, and you should smell wintergreen. This one is brewed a little bit differently than other plants. You'll harvest the young twigs and leaves and seal them in a jar because the flavor dissipates rapidly. And then you'll brew it for 30 minutes to several hours. And obviously you'll find this plant in forests. Number 10 is purple prairie clover. This plant is found in prairies. It has a sweet flavor, floral flavor, and you can harvest the leaves or the spent flower head right there, which you'll be able to smell right away. Staghorn sumac is next. You'll harvest the fruit, which is the red bunch at the top of the plant. And this tea has an astringent taste, so you may want to sweeten it. And if you do sweeten it, you'll be making sumac aid. In order to do that, you soak the berries overnight, which avoids releasing the bitter tannins, and then sweeten, and you have sumac lemonade. Staghorn sumac grows in fields and at the edge of forests. Our last species is Joe Pye weed. You'll harvest the leaves or the flowers, which have a sweet vanilla flavor. And Joe Pye weed is found in wet, sunny areas like around ponds or rivers. And do know that this plant can spread pretty rapidly given the right conditions. All right, so there you have it. Those are our 12 species that we went over. And we can take a couple minutes to address some comments or any questions that you have.
So Drew, there was a question about someone who's planning a rain garden and about some of the conditions of some of these that they might be able to grow within a rain garden area. I can say at least some of, so there are a couple in here that are specifically very good for the more damp part of the rain garden, depending upon if you're trying to make it more, if you want shrubs in it also, or trees.
Mm-hmm.
And, but many of these could definitely grow sort of on the not very bottom, but anywhere right out of the very bottom up to the edge. Like you almost can't go wrong with giant blue hyssop, New England aster. And you talked about Joe Pye weed is
yeah.
John's wort. There's a St. John's wort definitely that's a little more damp.
Yeah, giant St. John's wort or great St. John's wort.
That's a beautiful one. I have that one in my yard.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that.
And someone asks, can all of the birches be used? Every species of our native birch?
That's a good question. I'm not as familiar with the birch. I gave it a try over the winter and didn't have success with it. So I may have gotten the wrong birch. I would say look that one up a little further.
But paper birch for sure, right? That's sort of our most common.
Right.
Paper
birch for sure.
Also, somebody asks, they have lots of wild strawberry in the yard, and how risky is the cyanide? Like how careful do they have to be to make sure that they're vibrant new leaves?
I would say it's not a huge risk. Just if you see any leaves that are wilted and crumpled up and discolored, don't harvest those. Harvest the ones you saw in the video were all green and healthy looking. So just trust your gut.
And like you said, try a little bit at a time of each. I don't want to speak to the level of cyanide, but I imagine it's not as you would take one leaf and that would be but to be very cautious in anything that's using natural herbal.
Yeah. Have a cup and don't go overboard and that's all you drink all day. Have a cup and see how it goes.
Okay, anyone else? Any other questions? You could also unmute and ask a question if you have one.
How many
is bee balm
grow in the shade?
Shade, I think that's what I heard.
Yes.
So I just from my own yard and seeing what we see out in the parks, St. John's wort can definitely grow in half shade, half sun, as well as if you have giant blue hyssop in a spot it likes, you almost can't go wrong with that. It also reproduces itself pretty quickly. Bee balm also takes a wide variety of conditions. Wintergreen, if you can get it to grow this far south, can grow in pretty deep shade.
I've seen wintergreen actually growing in southern Maryland in the woods.
So
it might be a different wintergreen, but it grew there for what it's worth.
I think our challenge potentially if you're in a more sandy, in Milwaukee, this far over in Milwaukee County, we have such hard clay soil that maybe if some of you have a little bit more well-drained sandy soil, it might be easier there as well. At least I know that my yard is pretty much dense hard clay.
Mm-hmm. Was there another question?
Yeah, I noticed on your list for number 4, you have bee balm. And when you were talking, you said wild bergamot. Are those just different names for the same plant?
Correct. Those are both common names for the same plant.
Thank you.
I'll add something about hyssop. The hyssop plants I was at Lowe's, and there were 2 plants where they were out of the pots. They were just lying there. So I asked the clerk if I could take them, because they were just, these chunks with these leaves. And she said, sure. And they grew like weeds, even after that kind of abuse, sitting in the hot sun without a pot.
Yeah, they're very hardy. And we do have several native species of hyssop. This is definitely the most fragrant one, the Agastache funiculum.
I have a quick question. You had mentioned that white cedar could grow in some damp or moist woodlands. So this maybe I missed it, but this gets back to the rain garden. I have 3 huge native rain gardens, but I'd like to put some more trees in there. Would a white cedar work?
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
It can grow in a boggy wetland as well. White cedar are very well adapted to having their roots wet.
Okay, and they could sit in water, because mine will stay inundated. One of them, up to 10 days or more. I mean, it's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, 10 days for sure. It can go for several weeks fully wet. It just needs to have a dry period at some point over, the little air bubbles that it holds around its roots in order to exchange oxygen it can hold inundation for several weeks. It just at some point in the summer needs to kind of breathe and get that dryness.
Okay. That's really good to know. Thank you.
Yeah,
and white cedar can get quite large if you I'm sure there are cultural smaller versions. The one in my yard is, I think, 50 feet tall, but there are also small, depending upon its conditions and what it if you're giving it optimum conditions, it will get very large. If it's in its sort of medium tolerance of conditions, it'll stay at a smaller growth rate.
Okay, that really helps. Thank you so much.
Deer and rabbits love it, so you may have to cage it at the beginning too.
We got lots of those. Okay.
Yeah. A little bit of landscape cloth, caging, chicken wire does miracles.
Thank you. Very helpful.
Yeah, thanks for your expertise, Kim. I'm going to keep on keeping on, but if you have questions, feel free to throw them in the chat and we'll get to them at the very end.
Okay, well, I'll remute ourselves here.
All right, thank you. All righty. Next, we'll begin our next leg of the journey. We'll learn how to harvest the plants, to properly store the plants, and properly store the plants so we can enjoy the tea even when the plant is not around. So let's talk about responsible foraging. There are a few practices we can use when harvesting in natural spaces to ensure that the plant survives for future people and for the wildlife in the area. First question, how much should you collect? And the general rule for that is no more than 1/3 of what is available. For example, if there are 3 plants, you should take no more than 1/3 from each plant. You shouldn't, however, take one of the 3 plants because then you're reducing the size of that population and that plant will not survive. Second, if the population is small, do not collect from it. So my previous example with 3 plants, I would probably leave that population go and let it reproduce and grow so it can become a little more sustainable and it can tolerate a harvest. Third, be absolutely sure that foraging and collecting is legal and allowed in the area and for the species you plan to collect. Milwaukee County parks do not allow foraging of any kind. Some Wisconsin state lands do, but you should check the regulations prior to collection. And of course, obtain any permission from private or open lands. Consider also the impact you'll have on the plant when you remove a part of the plant. There are 3 parts we typically remove: the leaves, the flowers, and the roots. Harvesting the leaves has the lowest impact on the plant. Harvesting the flowers has a medium impact, and the roots has the greatest impact on the plant. And we'll look into why that is real quick. First, starting with the leaves, plants use leaves to create energy. So removing the leaves means the plant will produce less energy, and less energy in the plant means less energy in the roots and less energy for seed production. What about the flowers? Flowers, as we know, turn to seed, and seed is how the plant spreads. Therefore, harvesting flowers results in the plant spreading less. And as for the roots, harvesting the roots kills the plant, and the plant cannot reproduce and is now gone from that area. So a quick recap: when foraging, we should harvest no more than 1/3 of what is available. Avoid collecting from small populations, and consider the impact on the plant when we harvest the leaves, flowers, or roots. And of course, be a responsible forager. All right, where should you go to find these plants if you are planning on foraging? If you're looking to forage on public lands, know that some places prohibit the collection of plants. Just do your research. Figure out who owns the land. Federal and state rules can usually be found online. However, if it's county or municipal, it's probably a little smaller. So I would recommend finding a contact and asking if you can responsibly forage for plants. Again, Milwaukee County Parks do not allow for foraging or collecting of any kind. It'll help when you contact that person to let them know what plants you are collecting, because some plants are restricted or rare, and the landowner may not want you harvesting that plant. Also consider the use of the area. Is it an industrial site that has been previously contaminated, or are pesticides used on the property? Many plants have the ability to take these contaminants into their plant tissue, and you don't want to make a tea out of that. Finally, ask yourself, would this upset anyone? And if your answer is yes, just find somewhere else to go. So you can see that foraging in public areas has a lot of hurdles. An even simpler way to get your plants is to grow your own. Just find the species you enjoy and grow them. It could be in your front yard or on your patio or wherever else you have space to fit a few plants. If you do grow your own, you'll need to either find a live plant from a plant nursery or purchase seeds. And I'll list a few nurseries at the very end that sell natives. Just be sure when you are looking for a plant to use the scientific name. We'll go into that in a minute. All right, it's harvesting time. Although not necessary, the following tools make harvesting a little easier. Some pruners or scissors to cut the plant, the twine to hang any large plants. The screen over here is for delicate plant parts like leaves or flowers. And then you'll want a light-proof and airtight container, because both air and light will degrade your tea, your leaves, whatever you have in there. All right, one more tool that will help you in your foraging adventures are some identification tools. I use a phone application in conjunction with a book. The phone app, I can snap a photo and it generally will get it right, but then I can confirm with the book. And I would find a book that has fine plant details. You should use the scientific name. So here, this is Viola sororia, because that is unique to this plant. However, common blue violet could apply to many plants. And as we saw before with bee balm and wild bergamot, a single plant can have several common names. So scientific name will be italicized and in Latin, and that is a unique identifier. All right, let's go harvest. So you're out collecting your plants for tea, and maybe this is your awesome backyard, or maybe you got permission to harvest here. Whatever the case, what do you do now that you have all of your tea leaves or tea flowers or whatever you're harvesting? First, you should make a cup of fresh tea and see how that tastes. And after you've enjoyed your tea, you should consider how to preserve the rest of your harvest. I have a couple guidelines here, and they should work for any herb. The goal is to just remove all of the water from the leaves. By removing the water, you reduce the possibility for mold and bacterial growth. And when water is removed, it breaks down cell walls within the plant, and that allows nutrients and flavor to be more readily released. All right, and side note, don't bother washing the plant, as that'll increase the chance of mold and moisture buildup. If you're harvesting just loose leaves or flowers, you can lay them out on the screen like here. And if we harvested the full plant, you can hang it up like so. Hanging herbs should go in a location with good airflow and very little sunlight, maybe a covered porch, a screen porch, or a kitchen. After about a week or 2 weeks, the leaves should easily crumble and you can put them into your container. Remember that light and air deteriorate your tea, and if preserved in this way, the flavor, color, and nutrients should be preserved for about 1 year. All right, let's move on to brewing some tea. Here's a ratio for making tea. Most of you sounds like have already made tea, so you probably have your preferred methods. But if there's anyone out there who has never made tea, maybe start here. Note that the 1 teaspoon of herbs is for dried herbs. To make tea with the power of the sun, you can do everything the same, but don't bother heating your water and leave it out in the sun for several hours. The cup is tea, and the jar in the background is sun tea. And if you are using fresh herbs that you've just collected, use a bit more than you would dry herbs. It's important to start drinking these wild teas in small amounts to see how you respond, of course. And next we'll watch a short video on how to make infusions. Somewhere. That was a video from Mountain Rose Herbs. They sell teas So thanks to them for that video. All right, so recap what happened in that video. We were making an infusion, and infusions is a tea with more of the minerals extracted. Just as the video showed, you use an ounce of herbs, and to give you an idea of how much that is, in the upper right corner, that's an ounce of sage. In addition to what the video said, leaves you'll steep for 4 to 10 hours, and flowers for a shorter amount of time. And there's also a cold brew method. If you didn't want to heat everything, you could put everything in the fridge. And again, if your material is fresh, use more. Most importantly, have fun with this. It's a real joy to go out and collect your own tea plants and see what it tastes like for the first time. And it's a whole lot more satisfying to grow it yourself from seed or from a plug and have tea for the first time. And you can have quite a bit of fun with mixing. This is an old black tea that I've had for way too long. So I've started to mix it with wintergreen or with St. John's wort, just to change up the flavor a bit. In summary, we have learned about 12 plants native to Wisconsin and much of the Midwest that we can make into an herbal tea. We know how to responsibly forage. If we want to grow our own, we know we can find what we're looking for at plant nurseries. Down there at the bottom are a couple of them. I'll just read them. Prairie Nursery, Agricole Native Nursery, Johnson's Nursery, Shady Acres Perennial Nursery. We know the tools we may need. And when it comes time for identification, a book and possibly a phone app are handy. If we have a surplus of herbs, we know how to dry and save them. And finally, we learned how to make tea and a stronger infusion. Okay, thank you. We have time for any questions, and pass it